This is Epic Book Recaps, a podcast that offers complimentary audio summaries of influential nonfiction books, making learning a smarter experience. Why Nations Fail by Daron Acemoglu, PhD, and James A. Robinson, PhD. Early planning helps nations succeed. Countries rich in natural resources often face challenges, whereas those with limited resources can prosper, which confuses many who can't figure out why some nations do not succeed. The answer largely lies in economic factors. The wealth of a country relies on its natural assets and the capacity to grow its wealth. When government initiatives and services align with the needs and desires of the populace through comprehensive strategies, economies are likely to do well. The most advanced and safest economies belong to nations where the leadership responds quickly to major occurrences. If there is a framework in place that serves the population well, it helps maintain steady economic progress. Establishing a prosperous economy is more feasible in a nation where there are strong safeguards against embezzlement of public funds by individuals or companies. A healthy economy depends on leaders who view their roles as a duty to serve rather than an opportunity to enrich themselves. Conversely, in countries where wealth is concentrated among a small elite, enacting lasting change is a significant challenge. It's crucial to establish appropriate motivations for both leaders and the general population to foster a nation's development. In China, the law mandates the execution of those found guilty of embezzlement, while in African nations, such individuals are often celebrated. To build an economy that is sustainable, a country needs to move away from its previous approaches. Numerous developing countries are likely to stay impoverished because they did not make strategic plans early on. Nonetheless, countries that are prepared and resolute in their efforts to improve will experience beneficial outcomes if they persistently pursue their goals. The necessary adjustments to improve a country's economic situation don't happen overnight. These transformations demand sustained action from wise leaders. This summary presents the key factors behind the economic success of nations and explains why some countries have not attained it yet. The state of the economy is influenced by the quality of life that individuals experience. Nogales, situated within Santa Cruz County, straddles the renowned U.S.-Mexico border. A physical partition cuts the city into two distinct halves. Families of four residing in Nogales, Arizona, typically earn about $30,000 per year. Compared to many other regions, the standard of living is high and residents enjoy a longer life expectancy. The community benefits from fundamental amenities like potable water, sewage systems, comprehensive public health care, a network of roads linking them to other urban areas, and a local police department. Furthermore, democracy thrives here. In choosing their local mayor, state senators, or the President of the United States, the citizens of Nogales are afforded the same electoral privileges as those in any other American municipality. However, cross the boundary a short distance to the south, and the situation transforms dramatically. In Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, the average income per person is roughly a third of that in the U.S.'s northern regions. A significant number of young people in Nogales, Sonora, do not complete their education. Inadequate medical care and elevated rates of infant death impose additional burdens on mothers already facing challenging circumstances. The area is characterized by a deficit in democratic liberties and municipal amenities, and there is a prevalent issue of physical violence against individuals. Insufficient wealth curtails the citizens' motivation to strive for the nation's collective benefit. When looking at the north and south parts of Nogales, a clear contrast emerges. The border that cuts through the area is contained within the U.S. Americans benefit from straightforward access to their nation's financial mechanisms and can engage with political structures that protect their democratic voting rights. On the other side, residents of Nogales in the Mexican state of Sonora find themselves in a country with a different set of institutions. These differing systems present unique incentives that shape how business owners and investors pursue their interests in each region. Consequently, these incentives have a bearing on political influence. In the U.S., politics generally embrace public participation, whereas in Mexico, political power tends to favor the affluent elite. Political processes involve the collective decision-making through which a community determines the guidelines that will steer its governance. Daron Acemoglu and James A. Robinson. Daron Acemoglu. The Origins of Progressive Nations. An assembled catalog of the top 30 richest nations currently features major economies such as the United States, Russia, China, Japan, Singapore, and South Korea. While some of these countries have long enjoyed a position of wealth, others have experienced swift financial advancement. On the other end of the spectrum, the majority of the 30 poorest countries are found in sub-Saharan Africa, accompanied by a handful of Asian countries including Afghanistan, Haiti, and Nepal, which also fall into this category. Rewind half a century, and the lineup of the richest and poorest countries wouldn't change much. Nations like Singapore and South Korea wouldn't be among the affluent ones, preserving a ranking akin to what we see today. Several scientists have attempted to provide theories and explanations for the minimal changes seen in the rankings. The geography hypothesis, a widely accepted theory for explaining worldwide disparities, suggests that the vast differences between affluent and poor countries can be attributed to their geographical separation. This viewpoint posits that a lot of the less developed nations are situated within the tropical region of the Sahara, while the more advanced nations are typically found in tropical or moderate climates. However, this idea has its flaws. For instance, despite being in Africa's tropical region, Botswana is an example of a nation that is experiencing rapid growth and is recognized as part of the global emerging markets. The institutional frameworks in place today are anchored in a long and rich history. The culture hypothesis represents the second popularly recognized explanation, which connects wealth with cultural factors. It is often debated that the root of Africa's economic struggles is due to its people's reluctance to embrace contemporary technologies, a deficiency in a solid work ethic, and a commitment to old traditions such as witchcraft and voodoo. Despite this, it is noteworthy to mention that Africans have been responsible for the creation of some of the most significant technologies globally. The final prevalent theory is known as the ignorance hypothesis, which suggests that global disparity exists because individuals and governments lack the necessary understanding of how to foster economic growth in less developed countries. However, this perspective is challenged by examples from nations like Botswana and Ethiopia, which serve as evidence against the claims of this theory, just like the previous two theories mentioned. A defective system hampers the economy's ability to prosper. The disparities in economic prosperity among nations can be chalked up to distinctions in their financial systems, the makeup of their economies, and the drive of individuals. The absence of appropriate institutions can lead to economic challenges. History shapes political knowledge. Some individuals in positions of political authority consistently prefer to limit competition rather than encourage economic expansion. This attitude was evident following the catastrophic bubonic plague of 1346, often referred to as the Black Death. This devastating plague claimed the lives of around 200 million people worldwide and had a profound impact on numerous economies. When people exert substantial influence over the economy, there will be no expansion. The pandemic-induced labor shortage shook the foundations of the upper echelon. It galvanized serfs, bondsmen, and slaves to call for reform. In medieval England, agricultural workers at Ancient Abbey campaigned for lighter sanctions and the abolition of compulsory service. The realization of their goals marked the beginning of a new agreement. This development sparked reformations beyond their locale. Numerous serfs began to escape the burdensome compulsory services and other impositions set by their feudal lords. To counter this trend and revert peasants to their previous ways, the government enacted the Statute of Laborers in 1351, but it backfired. Understanding the reasons behind certain nations transitioning to more advanced socio-economic structures is fundamental to our financial standing. As a result of the 1688 Glorious Revolution, it was Parliament, not the monarch or the ruling authorities, that took on the duty of creating the country's essential economic structures. This shift opened up political involvement to a broader segment of the population, giving them more influence over the management of governmental affairs. Creative destruction, aiming to break down existing power structures to ignite creativity and give power to the people, proves challenging to implement across various countries. The approach involves providing substantial rewards to a select elite to motivate the masses to contest those currently in power. However, when power is centralized and opportunities are scarce, individuals with original and innovative concepts struggle to engage in this change-inducing process. Therefore, without creative destruction, societal advancement is hindered and the shift of power is obstructed. Are you aware that the term quarantine originated from the Bible and initially referred to a period of isolation lasting 40 days in 15th century Venice? Before this, Ragusa, which is now known as Dubrovnik, had established a 30-day isolation period to prevent the spread of disease as early as 1377. Literacy fuels growth. In 1445, the well-known German craftsman, engineer, and printer named Johannes Gutenberg introduced his revolutionary printing press in Mainz, significantly increasing the production of books. Before this invention, scribes laboriously copied each page by hand and carved individual pages into wooden blocks. However, Gutenberg's press marked the beginning of a new era. The proliferation of printed materials led to a surge in the distribution of books, laying the foundation for widespread literacy and education around the globe. Despite its positive impact, not everyone embraced this new technology enthusiastically. In 1485, Ottoman ruler Bayezid II banned the printing of books in Arabic, a prohibition which his successor, Sultan Selim Premid, reinforced in 1515. This ban persisted until 1727. As a result of this restraint on the printing press, literacy rates, educational quality, and economic progress all suffered. By 1800, nearly the entire population of the Ottoman Empire was unable to read or write. This was a stark contrast to England, where 60% of women and 40% of men lacked literacy skills. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands and Germany, about 70% of people were able to read and write. Consequently, the Ottoman Empire fell behind European nations in terms of literacy and development. Education is essential for the advancement of any economic system. All prosperous countries possess it, while numerous underdeveloped countries are in dire need of it. In nations where education is undervalued, the economic health is significantly impaired. The economic success of various nations is often shaped by their unique institutional frameworks. Such institutions shape the functioning of their economies and the incentives that encourage individuals to enhance their surroundings. A key element within these institutions is the concept of private property rights. Wealthy nations incentivize individuals and companies for their contributions to societal development. In contrast, less prosperous nations tend to hinder business efforts and offer assistance primarily in return for personal gains. Economic institutions that promote inclusivity establish a supportive setting for the emergence of fresh concepts. Countries governed by extractive institutions experience hardship. These systems are characterized by the government's redistribution of wealth from one segment of society to benefit another, which impedes progress. Nations need to be inclusive. Each nation requires agreement between its rulers and citizens. Countries with participatory governance and shared economic systems typically provide financial and political backing to one another. However, when a country that exploits others forms a bond with a country that embraces inclusivity, the wealthier states continually draw resources from those that are still developing. It is an irrefutable truth that wherever technology progresses, it becomes a fundamental driver of economic expansion, which in turn always instigates societal transformations. Such shifts inevitably create both beneficiaries and those who are disadvantaged. Consequently, the prevailing upper class often opposes reforms that broaden the inclusivity of institutions, despite these changes potentially benefiting the wider population. Impoverished nations suffer from poverty because the individuals in positions of authority make decisions that perpetuate the condition of being poor. Daron Acemoglu and James A. Robinson. Daron Acemoglu. The history of the Democratic Republic of the Congo serves as a clear illustration of the detrimental effects that an extractive government can have. Since gaining independence, there has been little to no significant strides towards progress in the Congo, largely due to the ruling class's lack of interest in instituting a government that incorporates the interests of all. This disinterest extends to the provision of public services for the population's welfare, as the leaders prefer to increase their own wealth while maintaining an exploitative governance system. The onset of Congo's issues coincides with the reign of Joseph Mobutu, who ruled as president for over 3 decades. He established economic systems within the country that were deeply predatory. As a result, the Congolese population suffered from extreme poverty and a lack of education. Meanwhile, Mobutu and his close circle of elites amassed significant wealth. Mobutu's wealth reached a point where he was able to construct a luxurious personal palace, complete with its own airport. Economic expansion happens when a larger number of individuals participate in making decisions. Numerous African nations have, historically and up to the current day, rulers similar to Mobutu, who are self-centered authoritarians. Had there been transparency in the governance of Congo, Mobutu would not have been able to accumulate his wealth. However, this isn't to say that economic growth is impossible under systems that exploit resources and people. Nations such as Russia and South Korea initially developed under such frameworks, and China continues to operate in this manner. Yet, for development to be enduring, both the economic and political systems must evolve to be more inclusive and participatory. The colonial past took its toll. The institution of slavery inflicted considerable harm on the economic systems of African nations. There are scholars who contend that, had it not been for slavery, African countries with pre-colonial autocratic regimes might have advanced progressively on their own timeline. The transformation of numerous African regions into hubs for the capture and sale of black individuals to Europeans altered these nations profoundly. The emergence of slavery sowed seeds of discord, escalating tensions among nations. This discord undermined the modest levels of political unity that existed in Africa, leading to the establishment of exploitative systems that did not serve the interests of the populace. A handful of African nations avoided involvement in the slave trade, only to find themselves under European domination, which led to widespread looting and devastation. These colonizers forced their subjects into long hours of labor without adequate compensation. South Africans, in particular, endured racial discrimination, the impacts of which would linger for centuries to come. Similar to the profound disruptions caused by the Black Death and the transatlantic slave trade, the different philosophies of colonialism exacerbated disputes surrounding institutions across numerous African countries. These nations often found it challenging to adapt to or mitigate the influence and tenets imposed by their colonial rulers. French-speaking African countries in particular faced difficulties in preserving their native languages, which in turn made it hard to maintain certain cultural traditions. The 1789 French Revolution significantly influenced the economic strategies of various nations. The revolution allowed France to transition from autocratic governance to a more democratic system. Seizing this chance, France rapidly industrialized and experienced swift economic expansion. Observing France's success, numerous European nations emulated this approach, often imposing changes on extractive institutions in nearby countries. This shift set the stage for industrialization and global commerce. Meanwhile, African nations were in the midst of adapting to fresh practices and reviving traditional techniques while European countries advanced. Africans frequently face challenges when adapting to recent changes. Major factors contributing to global disparity can be linked to the choices made by countries following major events such as conflicts and epidemics. The nations that are prosperous now are the ones that gained an early advantage in industrialization and scientific advancement. In contrast, less affluent countries lagged behind as they faced challenges related to slavery or the aftermath of colonial rule. Exploitation harms societies. Nations often remain subjugated and stagnant due to self-centered rulers, exploitative structures, and dictatorships. These elements typically create a relentless pattern that maintains corruption, strife, and stagnation. Leaders emerging after colonial rule, who take over exploitative systems, tend to place their own gains first. This selfishness can incite civil wars as various groups vie for dominance over the country's riches. This cycle continually repeats itself, with new leaders who share the corrupt mentality frequently taking the place of the old ones. To disrupt this recurring pattern, it's essential to set up a democratic framework where the citizens have the power to choose their leaders. Yet, in some nations purporting to uphold democracy, there are still exploitative systems in place that indulge in excessive spending. In places such as Uzbekistan, there is coercion of farmers and children alike to cultivate and gather cotton crops, which results in little enthusiasm for the work and a surge in the rates of illiteracy. For there to be a change in these oppressive institutions, it's necessary for individuals to mobilize and demand reform. For instance, Botswana has successfully reformed its exclusive economic structures into ones that benefit all. The nation's relative independence from colonial interference and a governance model uninfluenced by Western ideologies have enabled it to maintain its cultural integrity. The Tswana leaders implemented legislation that declared diamond revenues to be the collective property of the nation. They resolved that these riches should serve the population at large rather than personal or business interests, thereby generating communal wealth that funds public amenities for the general populace. Inclusive institutions play a vital role in the advancement of a nation. On the other hand, economies under authoritarian regimes often struggle to expand because they provide insufficient incentives for investment. Countries in sub-Saharan Africa are especially prone to this pattern and will likely continue to suffer unless they adopt more inclusive institutions. The feudal system of slavery, characterized by the oppression of black individuals by white people both within and beyond their borders, endured beyond the point when many African nations achieved independence. Institutions that embrace inclusivity are essential for the advancement of a country. Leadership motivated by self-interest and systems that exploit resources continue a destructive loop resulting in graft and strife. Meanwhile, dictatorships deprive citizens of incentives to contribute, causing the economy to become stagnant. Are you aware? From September to November each year, nearly 2.7 million students are compelled to leave their schools in Uzbekistan to participate in mandatory labor. Significant disparities in living standards across various nations arise from numerous causes. However, the central reason is the presence of different systemic institutions established by each country. A nation's prosperity isn't solely dependent on its current wealth or the resources found within its borders. No matter the extent of a country's riches, in the absence of effective systems, such wealth is squandered. The implementation of economic reforms plays a crucial role in a nation's progress. Lacking these reforms, power remains trapped in a loop, and it becomes particularly challenging when that loop shows no concern for the country's advancement. An effective government necessitates the involvement of its citizens. It thrives in an environment where corruption is not tolerated. The prevalence of corruption among many African leaders can be attributed to governmental complacency towards such practices. In contrast, in both developed and developing countries, corruption is met with disapproval, and the democratic process of electing leaders empowers citizens to either endorse or reject the actions of those in power. In addition to addressing corruption, it's crucial that a nation diversifies its revenue streams and avoids relying excessively on a single resource. While Middle Eastern countries rank among the wealthiest globally, their heavy dependency on oil is a risk. Should oil reserves deplete, their economic stability would be jeopardized. There are various factors that can lead to a nation's downfall, yet with the correct strategies, any country has the potential to reverse its plight and prosper economically. Do this. Engage in reading books about history and foster supportive connections across all aspects of your existence. Your well-being and joy will be amplified when surrounded by individuals who offer both encouragement and constructive feedback at the appropriate times.